Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if animals think and learn just like we do, especially when it comes to understanding tricky visual things? Well, today we're diving deep into a fascinating study that used pigeons to explore just that. Imagine trying to teach a pigeon to tell the difference between all sorts of rocks. Not just any rocks, but really complex ones that even scientists have a hard time categorizing. That is exactly what this research set out to do. The big question here is whether pigeons can learn to sort these complicated natural objects into categories that humans have defined. And critically, if their way of seeing and remembering these objects is similar to ours, it is a super ambitious project that tries to peek inside the pigeon's mind to understand how they learn. So, what is the main idea? Researchers wanted to understand animal cognition, and they figured the best way to do that is to first understand how animals experience the world through their senses, their perception, and their memory. They developed a way to map out how pigeons see and relate different rock images in their minds. Think of it like creating a personal map for pigeons, showing how similar or different each rock looks to them. Then, they used this pigeon map to predict how well these birds could learn to categorize the rocks. This is a first, they say, for creating a detailed mental map for an animal and using it to predict complex learning. The study starts by talking about how we study animal brains and behavior to understand our own minds and how they evolved. They mention that pigeons are surprisingly good at learning categories, even complex ones like recognizing human faces or medical images. They've even been taught to sort pictures of things like dogs, shoes, and cars into human-defined categories. This suggests that there might be some common ground in how both pigeons and humans learn to group things. Imagine if a pigeon saw a dog no differently than a shoe. They couldn't possibly learn to categorize them. So the fact that they can learn these categories suggests some overlap in how they perceive similarity. Past research showed that pigeons learn categories better when the categories feel naturally similar, not just randomly grouped. They also tend to generalize what they learn to new, unseen objects. This all points to similarity being a big deal for pigeon learning, but a big what if remained. Were these past studies using categories that were easy for pigeons to tell apart? What if the categories were really similar, making them hard to distinguish? And more importantly, what are the specific things pigeons focus on to learn these categories? Humans might look at many features like texture, shape, and color. Do pigeons, and do they focus on the same ones? This study aims to answer those questions by using a set of tricky rock images. This sentence really sums up the core philosophy of the research. Before we can understand how an animal learns categories, we have to understand their world through their eyes, ears, and memory. They wanted to create a psychological similarity space for pigeons, essentially charting what looks similar to them. Here is the plan. They used 81 rock images divided into 9 geological categories. They even grouped these categories into 3 high-level perceptual similarity classes, based on how they look to humans. Class A had dark, fine-grained rocks. Class B had lighter, coarse, grained rocks with messy textures. Class C had lighter, fine-grained rocks with organized striped textures. They hypothesized that pigeons would get confused within these high-level classes more than between them. To build that pigeon mind map, they first had pigeons do a semi-different task. It's like a memory game. They'd show a rock, then a second rock. The pigeon had to peck if the 2 rocks were the same, and not peck or peck differently if they were different. The key idea is that the more pecking the pigeon did when shown 2 different rocks, the more similar those rocks must have seemed to the pigeon. They used a sophisticated computational model to analyze the pigeon's pecking data. This model creates an 8-dimensional input space where each rock image is placed. The distance between any 2 rocks in this space represents how similar they are to the pigeon. It is like plotting points on a complex map. This first experiment was all about creating that pigeon perception map. They showed pigeons pairs of rock images and measured their pecking behavior. The idea was to see how often pigeons treated seemingly different rocks as the same. This pecking data, the same different behavior, was then fed into their mathematical model. They had 9 pigeons, but only 3 were good enough at the same different task to provide useful data. The others either didn't get it or took way too long. This is common in animal research. Not every subject masters the task. The model then used this data to estimate where each rock image should be placed in an 8-dimensional space. Think of each dimension as a unique characteristic that the pigeon might be sensitive to, like darkness or graininess. The distances between the rock images in this 8 dimensional space represent the pigeon's psychological similarity judgments. The model did a pretty good job predicting how much the pigeons would peck at different pairs of rocks. Importantly, the results showed a striking resemblance to a similar map created for humans using the same rock images. This is a big deal. It means that even though pigeons and humans are very different, they might perceive some fundamental features of these complex objects in a similar way. For example, dimensions like lightness or graininess seemed important to both species. This table shows the correlations between the dimensions the pigeon model found and the dimensions found for humans. High numbers mean pigeons and humans agreed on that dimension, like dark light or dull shiny. It is pretty impressive how many of these matched up. Now, with that pigeon perception map in hand, they moved on to the main event, teaching pigeons to categorize those 81 rock images into the 9 geological categories. They used the pexagram system, which are basically unique colored icons representing each category. Pigeons had to choose between 2 pexagrams to correctly sort a rock image. This is where the magic happens. They used a computational model called an exemplar-based model. The idea is that the pigeon remembers specific examples of rocks it has been trained on. When it sees a new rock, it compares it to all the examples it remembers, using the similarity map they created in experiment 1. If a rock is very similar to many examples of, say, granite, it is more likely to be classified as granite. The model was then tested to see how well it could predict the pigeon's actual performance. They looked at how often pigeons confused one rock category with another. The model, using the pigeon's psychological similarity space as input, was able to accurately predict these confusions. And it did a much better job than models that just guessed based on human intuition about the similarities. This strongly suggests that the perception map they built for the pigeons was actually capturing something real about how pigeons see the world. This figure shows how well the model predicted the pigeons' choices. The dots represent different types of category comparisons. The left side uses the pigeon's perceptual map, and the right uses a simpler category structure idea. The left side, the one using the pigeon's map, clearly fits the data much better. That's a huge win for the psychological scaling approach. They also looked at how well the pigeons learned over time. The model could predict the learning curves, showing when pigeons got better at distinguishing categories. Interestingly, they found some curious patterns, for example, in one high-level class of rocks. Pigeons were just as good at distinguishing categories within that class as they were between different classes. This was unexpected and provided further evidence that the pigeon's perception map revealed something human intuition didn't immediately grasp about how these rocks are grouped. Even within a single category, some rock images were classified more accurately than others. The model, using the pigeon's similarity space, was also able to predict these subtle differences. This shows that the model isn't just looking at broad categories, but also the fine details of how pigeons perceive individual items. So, what is the big takeaway? Pigeons are incredibly capable learners. Even with complex, hard-to-distinguish visual categories, the research team successfully created a detailed psychological map of how pigeons perceive rock images. And critically, this map was used to accurately predict their learning behavior. They found a remarkable similarity between how pigeons and humans perceive these objects, but also some key differences that were crucial for explaining the pigeons' specific learning patterns. This work is a major step forward in scientifically animal cognition by first understanding their unique sensory worlds. It's like they built a bridge between a pigeon's perception and their learning, showing that by understanding how an animal perceives, we can better understand how it learns. Now, let's talk about those similarities and differences between pigeon and human perception. They found strong agreements on things like lightness, darkness, graininess, shininess, and texture. This makes sense, as these are pretty basic visual properties. However, they also found differences, especially in how they perceived color and shape. This is important because these differences helped explain why pigeons performed the way they did on certain categories. For instance, maybe a particular rock's color is a huge cue for a pigeon, while for us, its texture might be more dominant. The researchers highlight how their work builds on earlier studies, but they've taken it further by using individual trial data, creating a high-dimensional psychological space, and directly linking it to sophisticated computational models for learning. This is a much more detailed picture than what was available before. No study is perfect, and the researchers are upfront about their limitations. They didn't test how well pigeons would generalize to completely new rocks they'd never seen before. They also curated their initial set of rocks to avoid really unusual ones that might be confusing even to humans. Future research could explore these areas. There are also some advanced points about the models used. For example, the model assumed a linear relationship between similarity and pecking, which might not always be true. They also found that category biases, meaning pigeons might have a natural preference for certain categories over others, regardless of the image played a significant role. The exact reason for these biases wasn't fully explained and is an area for future investigation. It is a bit like asking why someone prefers vanilla ice cream over chocolate. There might be taste preferences we don't fully understand. In the end, this is a groundbreaking study. It shows that by meticulously mapping out how pigeons perceive the world, we can unlock a deeper understanding of their cognitive abilities. They didn't just prove pigeons can learn complex categories, they showed how their perception underpins that learning and how it mirrors, yet also diverges from, our own. It's a beautiful example of how combining behavioral experiments, complex data analysis like psychological scaling, and computational modeling can truly push the boundaries of what we know about animal minds. It's not just about pigeons, it's about a new methodology for understanding cognition across species. So, what does this mean for us? It tells us that understanding perception is the absolute key to understanding learning and cognition, not just in animals, but likely in ourselves too. The way we see and experience the world shapes everything we learn and how we interact with it. It makes you wonder about the perceptual maps of other animals, and even how our own maps might differ in subtle ways, influencing our own learning and biases. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think animals have surprisingly similar perceptual worlds to ours? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this dive into the minds of pigeons, please give this video a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more amazing science breakdowns. We'll see you in the next one.